Hello and welcome to the presentation. Today we'll be talking about how to identify some common plants in the boreal forest and the best ways to pick or harvest them without hurting the environment. We'll also go over 10 common species of plants that you may find while out for a spring walk in the forest. Humans collect and use plants for all kinds of things: food, medicine, for making tools, making art, or even to start our very own plant collection at home. Your teacher will have some fun activities for you to complete after the presentation that will get you outside exploring all of the kinds of plants in the forest. So, before we get started, I would like to introduce myself. My name is Laura, and I work for the Lesser Slave Forest Education Society. There are so many things that I love about the boreal forest, but what I absolutely love most is how many super cool plants can be found in our own backyards. I also like searching for plants in the forest, learning their names, and even making art or pictures with the leaves and flowers. Before we talk about some of the common plants you might see in the forest, I have three simple tips for you when collecting plants from outside. It's okay to pick flowers, leaves, berries, and other plants from nature, but we should do it in a responsible way that doesn't take away food for wildlife or prevent more plants from growing. Follow these three easy steps when picking plants outside to help keep the environment healthy. Number one, make sure that you are in a place where it's okay to pick plants in the forest. Some natural places, like parks, have rules saying that you're not allowed to pick any plants because it could damage the ecosystem. But if you're in your own backyard or somewhere close to your house, you're probably okay to pick a few leaves and flowers. Just make sure to check before you go and watch for signs. Tip number two, only take what you need. If you find a plant with cool leaves that you would like to collect, you don't need to take the whole plant from the soil back to your house, only take some of the leaves. A good rule to follow is called the 10% rule. For every 10 berries or leaves or flowers that you find, only pick one and leave the remaining 9 in nature. However, if you find some weeds like dandelions, you can pick as much as you want. And finally, tip number three, if you can, try to identify the plant before you pick it. This will help to make sure you're not picking any endangered species or rare plants or ones that might have thorns or prickles. Some plants in the boreal forest are already familiar to us, like strawberries or blueberries, but others might not be. It's important to properly identify the plants that we find outside, especially if we plan on eating them. Remember, never eat a plant unless you know exactly what it is. There are lots of different ways to identify the plants we find in the forest. You can use a book or a field guide, an app on a phone or tablet, or even taking pictures of what you find and looking them up on the internet afterwards. You can also use one of our plant ID sheets or scavenger hunts, which your teacher will provide to you afterwards. Next, we'll go over a few tips on identifying plants just by looking at their leaves. We can tell a lot about plants by their leaves. The edge of a leaf is called a margin. Some leaves have jagged or toothed margins, while others are smooth. The size of the leaf can vary as well. Some leaves may have fine, curved teeth, while others have large, coarse teeth. Next, the way that leaves are arranged on the stem can also help us identify plants. Leaves can be alternate, like the plant on the left, arranged like steps going up the stem. Leaves can also be arranged opposite from one another on the stem. The last leaf arrangement we'll talk about is whorled, where the leaves grow from the same point around the stem in a circle. Finally, the type of leaf can give us a clue to identify the plant. The plants in this presentation have either simple or compound leaves. The stem of the leaf at the bottom is called the petiole. Simple leaves have one petiole that attaches one leaf to the stem of one branch. A compound leaf is made up of small leaflets which attach to the branch by a single petiole. Roses, raspberries, and strawberries all have compound leaves. Next up, we'll go over 10 plant species that you might find on a forest walk. These plants are all deciduous, which means that they lose their leaves in the fall. These plants might look different depending on when you go for your walk. Early in the spring, we should be able to find lots of leaves and flowers, but plants that bear fruit, like strawberries and blueberries, won't produce their fruit until later on in the summer, so you probably won't find too many berries in May and June. However, you can still learn to identify these plants by their leaves. The first plants that we'll talk about are mosses. Mosses like to be wet and away from direct sunlight, so you'll find them living in shadier and cooler parts of the forest. Some good places to find moss are on the forest floor, the base or side of tree trunks, and on fallen logs in the forest. Mosses are neat because they are different than other plants in that they don't have true roots, which means they can never grow much higher than 1 inch tall. Traditionally, mosses have been used to filter drinking water, dress wounds, or dried out and used as a fire starter. Plant number 2, horsetail. You can identify horsetails by their jointed stems and scale-like leaves that attach in a whorled pattern. Horsetails like to live in wet habitats, so you'll most likely find them in moist woods, wet meadows, along riverbanks, and beside roads. In the early spring, they might not have all of their leaves yet, but you'll be able to see the brown tops poking up from the soil, like you can see in the middle picture. Horsetails are living ancient plants. Giant horsetails that were as tall as trees in the forest used to exist alongside the dinosaurs millions of years ago. Horsetails also contain a chemical called silica, which makes them feel very rough. People used to collect horsetails to use as sandpaper and scrubbers to clean pots and pans, and they also work great as paintbrushes. This next plant we'll talk about is probably pretty familiar to most of us, the strawberry. Wild strawberries grow throughout the forest and can be found in open woodlands. You can identify wild strawberry by their compound leaves, which grow low to the ground and are made up of 3 leaflets. Each leaflet has large, coarse teeth at the top and fewer teeth as you get closer to the petiole where they attach to the stem. The flowers are white with a yellow center and 5 petals. And of course, the strawberries they produce are edible and delicious. Plant number 4 is bunchberry. Bunchberry leaves have smooth margins that attach to the stem in a whorled pattern, which is different than the toothed leaflets of strawberry plants. The red bunchberry fruits are edible, but they don't have a very strong taste. You'll be able to find the leaves and flowers in the spring and the berries later on in the summer. The Cree name for bunchberry translates as itchy chin berry because it has bristly leaves. Plant number 5 is the prickly or wild rose. You can identify a rose by its compound leaves with 7 sharply toothed leaflets. In the spring, roses produce beautiful bright pink flowers that smell amazing. But remember to be careful around this plant, as the stems are covered with sharp thorns. The fruit of the wild rose is called a hip, which are edible and high in vitamin C, but they must be cooked first. The seeds inside the rose hip are covered with tiny hairs that can irritate our stomachs if they're eaten raw. Plant number 6, red osier dogwood. The easiest way to identify dogwood is by its bark. This shrub has bright red stems and branches. Both the branches and the leaves are arranged oppositely or across from each other. The leaves have a smooth margin and a pointed tip. The small white flowers are arranged in clusters and will eventually become bitter white berries. Dogwood is an important food for many animals, especially in the wintertime. Animals from birds to bears eat the berries, and moose in particular love snacking on the tips of the twigs. For this reason, red osier dogwood is sometimes called moose spaghetti. Number 7, raspberry. This plant grows as a small shrub in the boreal forest, and you can identify it by its compound leaves with 3 to 5 sharply pointed and toothed leaflets. The flowers grow in clusters and are small and white with 5 petals. The bright red fruits appear later in the spring and summer, and they are delicious. However, raspberries are guarded by sharp, tiny hairs and bristles that could poke you or make you itchy, so remember to be careful when foraging for this tasty fruit. Plant number 8 is probably pretty familiar to us as well, blueberry. Blueberry plants can be found growing in dry, sandy soils, especially underneath pine trees in the forest. The twigs have soft, velvety hairs, and the leaves are small with smooth margins and arranged alternately on the stem. By early June, the flowers will appear, which are shaped like tiny little bells that can be white, pinkish, or even a little bit green in color. Blueberry fruits ripen even later in the summer and are ready to be picked in late July and August. Humans are not the only animals who like to eat blueberries. Bears are also very common visitors to blueberry patches, so always make lots of noise when you're walking through a big patch of blueberries. Plant number 9 is willow. Willows are usually found next to a lake or close to a large body of water. Willows are easy to identify due to their long, skinny leaves with pointed tips and their unusual flowers, which are called catkins or sometimes pussy willows. Willows have flexible branches that make them great for making all sorts of things from baskets and drums to snowshoes and walking sticks. When peeled off, the bark has been used to make rope and fishing nets. Finally, the last plant that we'll talk about today is the cattail. Cattails are a familiar sight along the edges of marshes and are easily identified by their flowering spike at the top of their stem, which kind of looks like a hot dog on a stick. The flowers pop open in the early fall, spreading their fluffy seeds into the water or wind. Most of the parts of the cattail plant are edible. In particular, some people say that the roots taste kind of like spicy cucumbers. Thank you for watching. Now that you know some cool plants to look for in the forest, we have some additional activities for you to complete that will be shared with you by your teacher. You can do a scavenger hunt and try to identify the plants near your house. If you like to make crafts, use the leaves and flowers you collect on your forest walk to make a nature self portrait. And if you like to collect and organize things, why not create your very own mini natural history museum? Remember, there are always lots of other cool things to find and collect in the forest that are not living plants, too. Keep your eyes open for cool rocks, dead crunchy leaves, rough bark, or any other treasures that you might find on your forest adventure. I'm looking forward to our virtual field trip in a few more weeks where we'll talk even more about cool plants in the forest. Until then, take care and have fun.